talk about problem 4-3 and get you a little familiar with the DuPont formula and why it works. And so you'll look in your book and you can see when it, in the section about the DuPont formula, it uses the ratio that return on equity equals return on assets times the equity multiplier. We can go a little deeper into that layer and say return on equity equals the profit margin times total asset turnover times equity multiplier. So return on assets, another way to calculate return on assets is profit margin times total asset turnover. If we take that a little deeper, one more layer, profit margin, the ratio for profit margin is net income over sales. And to get total asset turnover, it is sales over total assets. And the equity multiplier, as talked about in your book, is total assets over common equity. So we have different layers that we can calculate return on equity and return on assets. And the reason it works, I want you to first take a look at return on equity, which we could, another way to calculate return on equity, anytime you see return, net income is going to be in the numerator, and return on equity then is net income over equity, and return on assets is net income over total assets. So I want to just take a look at return on equity, net income over equity. We're saying the same thing down here because if we eliminate numerators and denominators that are the same, sales and total assets, we're left with net income over equity, which is another way to say return on equity. We can do the same thing with return on assets, which is profit margin times total assets by eliminating just sales, and you can see we have net income over total assets. So when we have this problem of 4-3, we're given information. I like to always, whenever I'm calculating a problem in finance, I like to have right in front of me to write down the things I know. And here I'm trying to get what the problem says in my book. If I can get to it, there we go. Okay, so in 4-3, we have return on assets is 10%. We have profit margin is 2%. We have return on equity is 15%. So these are all the things that we have been given. And we're asked what is TATO, total asset turnover, which is sales over total assets. We don't know what that is. We need to solve for what that is. And we're also asked what is the equity multiplier, which is total assets over equity. We don't know what that is. Okay, so let's just start out with first return on assets. We know equals profit margin times, if I'm looking at this part of the layer, profit margin times TATO. I'm going to solve for total asset turnover because I have return on equity, I have profit margin. So I can easily solve for total asset turnover by switching around this equation. So I can say 10% divided by 2% equals total asset turnover. So I'll take my calculator and say 0.1 divided by 0.02, and that gives me 5. So total asset turnover equals 5. So I know that 5 is sales over total assets. That's my total asset turnover. So we've solved for the first thing that was asked, what is the total asset turnover? It is 5. Now we'll solve for the equity multiplier, which is total assets over equity. And so using the DuPont formula, I know that return on equity, I'm going to use this portion, profit margin times TATO times the equity multiplier. Profit margin times total asset turnover times equity multiplier. And we've been given return on equity is 15%. Since we've solved for total asset turnover, we can now solve for the equity multiplier. And we can do that. I'm going to take this first. 15% equals 0.02 times 5 is, I better clear my calculator. This is actually 10%. 2% times 5 is 10% times the equity multiplier. And now we can divide 15% divided by 10% equals the equity multiplier equals, if I take 15% divided by 10%, and we have equity multiplier is 1.5. So I hope that helps you solve that first problem. The idea is to put in what you do know and then solve for those items that you need to solve for. So that's how I would approach the problem for 4.3.